When the 2 children were born, I swapped them. Lena is my daughter, and Nala is yours. Amidst the deep green mountains and winding streams of ancient West Africa lies a small village named Kaya. The village of Kaya is a fertile land nestled beneath large trees, surrounded by lush green hills and mountains. Majestic mountains, along with fields stretching across the horizon, create a peaceful picture of this land. The people in the village live simply, but are always harmonious and happy, except for Nya and Tunde. Nya and Tunde were admired by the villagers, not only for their wealth, but also for their strength and authority. Their estate was vast, with expansive fields, numerous livestock, and a grand house built from ancient stones passed down through generations. They were symbols of success, but for Nya, this prosperity couldn't fill the emptiness in her heart. Despite the material abundance, she still felt a profound absence. The laughter of children. Every day as Nya watched the village mothers leading their children along the narrow paths, her heart would ache. The children laughed and played, running around haystacks or along the clear streams, and Nya longed to have a child of her own. In the mornings, she would stand in front of her house, her eyes gazing toward the horizon, where the sunlight shimmered on the mountaintops. She would close her eyes and silently pray, hoping that some miracle would grant her the joy of motherhood. But as time passed, the hope that once filled her heart slowly faded into a lingering sense of disappointment. Tunde, her husband, felt no different. A strong and ambitious man, he had always longed for a son to carry on the family line, to preserve and expand the legacy passed down by his ancestors. Though he never spoke of it, Tunde understood his wife's pain, and he too felt the pressure of being unable to have a child to continue their lineage. 5 years had passed since they were married, and the fragile hope for a child had grown increasingly distant. By the 5th year of their marriage, Tunde felt that he could no longer wait. One night, when the full moon shone brightly over the village of Kaya, Tunde sat in the kitchen of their large home. He kept glancing at the door, waiting for Nya to return from her visit to the healer in the neighbouring village. Finally, when she entered, looking exhausted, Tunde decided it was time to make the decision he had wrestled with for so many nights. He stepped closer to her, his voice low and serious. "Nya, we've tried for so many years. I know you've prayed, taken all the herbs the healers have prescribed, but still nothing. I need an heir, someone to carry on and grow what we have." Nya looked at her husband, tears welling in her eyes as she felt the pain in his words. She didn't want to believe she would lose her place in Tunde's heart, the man she loved more than anything. Her heart ached as he continued, "If we cannot have a child, I must take another wife, Nya. This is not to punish you, but to preserve our family line." Nya stood frozen, her eyes glistening with pain, her hands trembling. She knew Tunde had made up his mind and he would not change it. She tried to beg for more time, but Tunde only shook his head. "Look at what we have. The land, the wealth, all of it needs an heir." Tunde's words tore at Nya's heart. Faced with her husband's unyielding decision, Nya knew she had to give in. But instead of letting him choose another wife himself, she devised a bold plan. "All right, if you must have another wife, let me be the one to choose her. I want it to be someone I can trust," Nya said, her voice full of determination. Tunde hesitated at his wife's request, but in the end, he agreed, as the only thing that mattered to him was having a child. Who the mother was no longer mattered. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Nya left the house, her heart heavy with a silent pain. She knew that if she had to choose a wife for Tunde, it had to be someone she could completely trust. And there was no one else but Imani, her best friend. Imani and Nya had grown up together, as close as sisters. From childhood, they had always been an inseparable pair. Imani was the only one who knew all of Nya's pains and joys, the person Nya trusted enough to share her deepest secrets. Remembering their childhood together, Nya believed that if there was anyone she could trust to become the mother of Tunde's child, it could only be Imani. When Nia arrived at Imani's house, she stood at the gate, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She walked inside with a sad but determined expression, her eyes never leaving her best friend. "Imani." Nia hesitated, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking any louder would make her pain spill out. "I have something to ask of you, and I know it won't be easy." Nia paused, her eyes pleading as she looked at her friend. "I want you to become Tunde's second wife." Imani was stunned, staring at Nia in disbelief. A terrifying silence filled the room. Finally, Imani spoke, her voice sharp with a hint of shock. "Nia, why would you say that? You know I'm engaged to Sefu and I'm about to get married. And even if I weren't engaged, I would never agree to marry your husband." Nia didn't give up. She pleaded, tears streaming down her face, begging Imani as if her life depended on it. Nia gave every reason she could think of, saying that only Imani was someone she trusted and that she couldn't let a stranger enter her life. But no matter how much Nia begged, Imani refused, firmly. She couldn't give up her love and happiness with Sefu, the man she was about to marry and with whom she had dreamed of a future together. Finally, in desperation, Nia changed her tone. She stood up, her gaze shifting, cold and devoid of compassion. "If you don't agree, I will tell the whole village that you are an Osu, a member of the outcast class that you and your family have tried to hide for so long." Imani stood frozen, as if her entire world had collapsed around her. She couldn't believe that her best friend would threaten her with her deepest, most painful secret. Since childhood, Imani's family had to flee their old village because they were part of the Osu caste, the outcasts, considered outsiders, not accepted, despised, and forbidden to marry others from the village. Because of this status, they were not allowed to socialize, make friends, or build families like ordinary villagers. Seeing the fear in her friend's eyes, Nia continued, her voice carrying an ominous threat. "You know what this would mean for your parents and your family, don't you? If the villagers find out the truth, they will drive you out. They might even harm your family. So think carefully." Imani endured long, restless nights, barely able to sleep, her mind tangled in a storm of pain and torment. The thought of accepting Nia's request felt like an unending nightmare, suffocating her heart little by little. She had dreamed of a peaceful life with the man she loved, Sefu, who had promised to protect her and build a family together. But now all those dreams had shattered into countless pieces. Sefu, her future, and even her self-respect all seemed to be drowning in the dark night of coercion and threats. On a night when the pale moonlight filtered through the rustling leaves, Imani decided that she could no longer continue struggling in this helplessness. She knew that there was no choice but to agree to Nia's request. The price of refusal was too high, not just for her, but for her entire family, who would face rejection and ruin if the truth about their Osu lineage was exposed. She had heard the terrifying stories of those considered Osu in other villages, those deemed outsiders, ostracized, despised, and even forbidden to mix with others in the community. The following night, Imani put on her traditional dress, though her heart felt far from peaceful. As she stepped into Nia's house, the darkness inside seemed to grow thicker, enveloping her, and she felt as if she were walking into a life of imprisonment. Her eyes were hollow from sleepless nights, her frail shoulders slumped as if bearing the weight of an entire world of sorrow. Standing before Nia, she couldn't find the words to speak. She simply bowed her head and finally uttered words that tore at her soul. "Nia, I will do as you ask." Nia heard those words, and though she had made her decision long before, she could still feel the pain her friend was enduring. A sense of guilt welled up inside her. Her heart tightened and her eyes began to mist over. She stepped forward, took Imani's hand, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I am sorry, Imani. But I have no other choice. I cannot let any other woman but you into this family." Tears rolled down her face, reflecting the agony both women were enduring. Nia knew she was pushing her best friend into a marriage she did not desire, but her selfishness and her longing for an heir made her ignore everything, even their precious friendship. Not long after, the wedding date was set. However, this was not a joyful, festive wedding as one might expect. A tense and heavy atmosphere hung over the entire village of Kaya. The villagers murmured about this strange wedding, a ceremony seemingly devoid of love, filled only with sorrowful eyes and resignation. When Imani put on her wedding dress, her heart felt no joy that a bride should feel. She walked like a shadow, with a forced smile and eyes full of sadness. Blessings echoed around her, but her heart was completely empty, as if she was standing at the edge of despair. Tunde, the man she had to marry, stood there silently, not saying a word. He knew well that this was not what Imani wanted, and this made him feel uneasy. But like Nia, he was driven by the desire to have an heir. Occasionally he glanced at Imani, trying to find some connection, but only received her painful silence in return. When the ceremony ended, and Imani officially became Tunde's second wife, she felt as if her life had been swept into a dark, inescapable vortex. The first night after the wedding, Imani sat alone in her cold room, facing the bleak future ahead. She knew that from now on her life would no longer be free and her heart would forever be imprisoned in this forced marriage. All hopes of love with Sefu, of the warm family she once dreamed of, were now nothing but painful memories. As time went on, life in the household between Nia, Tunde and Imani gradually settled. But the tension remained present in every glance and every word. Imani lived with resignation, accepting her fate in a loveless marriage. Tunde, the man she was forced to live with, also kept his distance, even though they both tried to treat each other with respect to avoid disrupting their shared life. Naya, although the one who made this decision, sometimes felt tormented when witnessing the sorrowful looks from her friend. Every night, she told herself that these sacrifices were necessary, all for the longing of a child to carry on the lineage. One day, Nia began to notice unusual changes in her body. She felt weaker while doing her usual chores, sometimes even feeling out of breath just from taking a few steps to the garden. At night, she couldn't sleep deeply, often feeling exhausted for no clear reason. She felt that something was changing inside her, something very different that she had never experienced before. At first, Naya thought she might be ill due to stress, but when the fatigue persisted, she decided to invite the village healer to check on her. The healer was an experienced man who had helped many women in the village overcome difficult illnesses. He entered the house with kind eyes, carrying the herbal packets he always brought with him. After carefully examining Nia, the healer looked up with a bright smile. He looked at Nia with eyes full of happiness and slowly announced, "Congratulations, Nia." "You are pregnant?" Naya was stunned. For a moment she couldn't believe her ears. Then, like a sweet stream flowing deep into her heart, joy filled her completely. Those words echoed in her mind, filling every emptiness that had weighed on her heart for so many years. She felt as if the entire world lit up, everything around her became vibrant and full of colour. She almost burst into tears of happiness, a feeling she had dreamed of countless times. When Tunde heard the news, he could not hide his joy. The child he longed for, the one who would carry the family lineage, was now taking shape. Tunde held Naya tightly, his eyes filled with hope and love. He had once thought he would never have this moment, but now it had become reality. However, as tears of happiness streamed down her cheeks, Naya also felt a sense of regret creeping into her heart. She thought of Imani, the friend who had sacrificed her own happiness because of Nia's threat. Since the day Imani became Tunde's wife, she had always kept her distance, never demanding, never doing anything to affect the family. In Imani's eyes, there was always resignation, patience, and sometimes silent pain. That scene now appeared in Nia's mind more clearly than ever. Naya understood that she had been too hasty and selfish in forcing Imani into this loveless marriage. She had let her greed cloud everything, including the deep friendship between the two of them. In that moment, Naya silently promised herself that when the child was born, she would let Imani be free. so that her friend could find the life she desired and deserved. Nia knew that nothing could compensate for the pain Imani had endured, but she hoped that a promise of freedom would, in some way, soothe Imani's suffering. Now, every time Nia thought of the child in her womb, a mixture of joy and regret rose within her heart. She promised herself that she would make it up to Imani, that she would do everything in her power to allow her best friend to live a free life, no longer bound by the mistakes she herself had made. Nia believed that when her child was born, it would be the moment she could atone for her mistakes and give their friendship a second chance. The next day, the healer returned to Nia's house to check on her health. The elderly healer was calm and careful in his actions, examining her while congratulating her with joy evident on his face. Nia was still immersed in the happiness of the previous day, her eyes shining with hope and joy, feeling like she was finally about to have what she had long desired. The healer nodded in satisfaction after finishing, and he prepared to leave the large house of Nia and Tunde. As he stepped out of the house, he happened to see Imani standing near the gate, her face showing a hint of worry and fatigue. Imani politely bowed, and seeing her expression, the healer frowned slightly. He noticed that Imani exhibited similar signs to Nia the previous day, pale, tired, and her figure showing subtle changes. With the concern of a skilled healer, he offered to check Imani's health, and she agreed with caution and anxiety. After a careful examination, the healer looked at Imani with a face of joyful surprise and announced to her, "Miss Imani, I bring you good news. You are also pregnant." Imani was stunned, her eyes wide in disbelief at what she had just heard. Her heart pounded, a mix of joy and fear. How could she feel completely happy knowing she was about to give birth to a child for a husband she had never loved? Imani felt her anxiety grow as she thought about Nia's reaction. The news didn't take long to reach Nia. When she heard that Imani was also pregnant, her whole body seemed to freeze, and the joy and happiness she had felt turned instantly into a raging fire of jealousy. Nia had dreamed of the day when she would be the sole mother of the heir to Tunde's estate, and that her child would mean everything to the family. But now, the thought of Imani's child sharing the legacy, the wealth, and even Tunde's love with her own made her feel as though she was losing her mind. Nia felt angry, hurt, and betrayed. How could the friend she had forced into this unwanted marriage become the mother of another of Tunde's children? Nia began to worry about the future, that Imani's child would threaten her own child's place, and perhaps that child might even be loved more by Tunde. Her mind was consumed by the fear of losing, jealousy slowly eating away at the old friendship between her and Imani, and she began to feel more bitter than ever. At night, when only Nia and Tunde were left sitting together in the quiet room, she could no longer hold back her emotions. Her eyes stared at her husband, her voice cold. "Tunde, don't you think this is too unfair? We both know that your estate needs a single heir." Tunde frowned, his eyes reflecting disappointment. He understood Nia's feelings but could not ignore Imani's right to be a mother. He looked directly at her, his voice firm and unyielding. "Nia, if you dare harm Imani or her child, you will no longer have a place in this family." Tunde's warning was like a heavy blow to Nia's pride. She felt isolated, with no one on her side in the family she had sacrificed her friendship to build. But instead of abandoning her hatred, Nia allowed her jealousy and bitterness to continue growing secretly. She could not directly harm Imani and her child, but that did not stop her from finding ways to make their daily lives difficult. Imani had to endure Nia's cold and harsh treatment from that point on. Though she sometimes wanted to complain, she remembered the past threat about her secret and dared not say a word. Despite the pain and loneliness, Imani tried to stay calm for the sake of the child growing inside her, hoping to provide a bright future for the baby, even if it meant enduring the suffering Nia was inflicting on her. Years passed, and time seemed to carry away all the pain and conflicts, but the bitterness still lingered between Nia and Imani. Every day they lived under the same roof, but seemed to exist in separate worlds, divided by secrets, jealousy, and wounds that could never heal. Lena, Naya's daughter, grew up in her mother's love and indulgence. She was beautiful, radiant, and was cared for meticulously by Naya, who hoped that Lena would be the pride and the heir to the family's legacy. On the other hand, Nala, Imani's daughter, endured a very different life. Shunned by Nya, Nala grew up in scorn and neglect, and as a child, she had been mistreated by Nya to the point that her frail legs could not endure and gradually lost sensation. Now, Nala had to rely on a cane, moving with difficulty and loneliness within her own home. At that time, a young doctor named Ethan arrived in Kaya village, bringing with him the energy and knowledge of a distant world. He was respected by the villagers for his talent and passion, traveling from place to place, helping the sick, and bringing hope to those in need. During a chance encounter with Lena, Ethan was immediately captivated by her beauty and charm. They quickly fell in love, and not long after, Ethan proposed to Lena, promising a life filled with happiness and love. The wedding day of Lena and Ethan took place in the joyous atmosphere of the entire village, with everyone gathering to bless the young couple. However, amidst the laughter and lively music, there was a solitary figure standing quietly in the corner, watching the ceremony with a sad gaze. It was Nala. She sat beside Imani, her eyes glistening with tears, but not from joy. The difference between the two sisters, one who was loved and admired, and the other who endured suffering and neglect, made Nala's heart ache. In the emotional moment of the wedding, Imani bent down, grasping Nala's frail hand, her voice gentle yet full of meaning. "Nala, I have done everything to give you a better life. You have endured so much, but know that I will never abandon you." As soon as those words ended, Naya unexpectedly heard them from afar. She couldn't control herself and shouted loudly, walking quickly towards them with an angry look. "Imani, don't say strange things about my daughter. Lena is my daughter, my only child." Imani did not flinch at Nia's furious gaze. Instead, she smiled calmly, mysteriously. She looked at Nia, her voice filled with both pain and serenity. "Nia, have you ever wondered why I have endured all the suffering and resentment over all these years?" Nia looked at Imani confused, unable to understand the meaning behind her words. Imani continued, her eyes filled with determination but also sadness. "When the two children were born, I swapped them. Lena is my daughter, and Nala is yours." Imani's words echoed like thunder in a clear sky. The entire crowd fell silent, staring at each other in shock, unable to believe what they had just heard. Nia stood frozen, her face pale, her heart feeling as if it had been shattered into 100 pieces. She looked towards Nala, the girl with weak legs and sorrowful eyes, now realizing that she was her biological daughter, the child she had neglected, the one she had cruelly mistreated. Guilt and despair rose in Naya's heart as she screamed, her eyes filled with tears. "No, no, Imani, you couldn't have done this." Imani said nothing more, just stood there quietly, her eyes shimmering with sadness and serenity. She looked at Nia as if to say that this was the price they both had to pay for their mistakes and selfishness. Then, with a gentle but bitter smile, Imani turned and left the crowd, leaving Nia in shock and despair. Nia, now understanding that her bitterness and jealousy had destroyed her life and the lives of those she loved, felt her heart shatter. She looked at Nala, trying to step towards her daughter, but her trembling legs could no longer support her. In that moment, Nia felt her life engulfed by the darkness of regret and pain. With nothing left to lose, she turned and ran down to the harbour, where she allowed herself to be consumed by her desperate and sorrowful thoughts. Imani stood from afar, calmly watching, as if she had finally let go of all her burdens. The years of endurance had brought her tranquility, and now she found her ultimate release in the peaceful look in her eyes.